It's a problem that says, look how good I am, and look at how bad the rest of the world is. Look at how bad the rest of the Christians are. And here's what I know I'm really good at. You might be really good at this too, because you're human. I'm really good at judging people. Anybody else good at judging people? Oh, see, I got a hand raised. I know this is not confessional time, but I'm really good at judging people, right? Like right off the bat, I can look at somebody and I can say, you know what? I know exactly what that person's going to do. But 99% of the time, I'm wrong. But I still think I'm good at judging people. I think I'm a good judge of character, right? I can look at somebody and I can say, well, this person's going to do bad or this person's going to do good, right? And I can look at them and I can make a comparison. Can you do that? Can you make a comparison to other people and say, look at me and look at you, look at the difference between us? But then when you sit back and you think about it and you go, I'm just as human as they are, right? I'm just as human as the person I'm standing next to is. And our problem that we deal with, religious people are particularly good at this. We're particularly good at judging people and making sure that, they know that they're in a wrong state, right? We're particularly good at looking at other people's flaws, but we're not particularly good at looking at our own. We're not particularly good at saying, what about me? Right? So sometimes this is what we have a tendency to do, if my remote's going to work here for a second. Sometimes we judge others for their flaws without first considering our own. In other words, we're quick to go, look at what that guy did, right? With a smile on her face. I won't do that bad thing. But behind closed doors, it's a completely different picture. In your heart, it's a completely different picture than it is externally and what people see in your community. And we judge people for their flaws and what they do wrong and their shortcomings and their failures, and we don't even consider what we would do wrong. We don't even consider the fact that we might be wrong. But we're so good at judging people. In other words, if you really don't get what this says, here, let me break it down with you. Human beings, this is not a Christian thing. This is not a non-Christian thing. This is just a human thing, right? The human thing is the humans struggle to help themselves before they help others. We struggle to help ourselves and say, what can I fix? How can I make myself better? How can I look internally? What are my flaws? What are my failures? Before we go help somebody else. When you're flying on a plane, what's the rule, right? Put your mask on before you put your child's mask on, right? Put your mask on so that you're safe before you put your child's mask on. Help yourself before you help others. And it's not a selfish thing. It's so that you can make the adjustments that you need to make in order to keep it safe, right? But this happens all the time. It happens all the time. It happens in marriages, right? We're so quick to point the finger. Look what they did wrong. Look what this did wrong. And I know this is not every situation, but when you get in a fight, you're quick to point the finger, right? Men were particularly bad at, just laying down and saying, honey, you're right. I'm sorry, right? We're particularly bad at that, guys, okay? I know, because I'm a man, I'm married, I have a wife, and sometimes I just have to, okay, you're right, I'm sorry. Even though, I will maintain that I'm right? And when there's problems in marriages, when there's divorces, when there's relationship failures, when there's all these things, we're so quick to point the finger and say, look what you did, without even considering ourselves. It happens all over the place. It happens also in, if my remote's going to work, it happens in family dynamics, right? Big families, close families. It happens, with your teenagers and with, your other people that are in your life, where you're so quick to point the finger. When you bring up those really good topics at family dinners, Thanksgivings, Christmases, where you start talking about religion and politics, and everybody's got a different opinion and a different view on it. And some of us are conspiracy theorists, and some of us are deceived, and you bring all this stuff up, and then all of a sudden there's different arguments, and you start pointing the finger about who's wrong, who's right. And then there's a fight, and then there's a split, and then there's all the stuff that happens. There's all these different things, right, where we're so quick to point and we're so quick to judge other people without even considering ourselves. Here's another big one for you, that I just talked about, politics, right? How many politicians do you see out there that are so quick to say the other guy's doing the wrong thing? The other guy's in moral compromise. The other guy isn't doing this right, right? I mean, you could probably have stories and things you see on Fox News or CNN or whatever you watch. But you see all these things. And you're like, well, you're so quick to point the finger. And then how about this? How about religions? Why do churches split? Why do religions split? Well, because, sometimes it's people pointing the finger, not looking at themselves. Why did churches of Christ split? Why are there splits? Because people are so quick to point the finger instead of going, where are my failures? Where are my flaws? And how, the simplicity of it is this. If we're going to avoid problems in relationships, in personal relationships with people, we're going to avoid this finger-pointing, playing game, what we really have to do is sit back and ask ourselves this question. Because this is where we go wrong, is we think, sometimes we don't ask this question. We don't ask, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? Who did I do wrong? We don't ask this question. We're so quick to point the finger, judge the person in the aisle and next to us, and we don't ask this question: what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? A lot of times it's like, well, I didn't do wrong, and the person you're in dispute with says, well, I didn't do wrong, and then all of a sudden it's people who they're puffing their chest and saying, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. But the simple fact of the matter is, we're going to avoid problems. If we're going to avoid being like Pharisees, if we're going to avoid being legalistic, we're going to avoid that whole grand scheme of things, where we become what God doesn't want us to become, and we start becoming divided. We've got to ask this question, because the simple fact of the matter is that God doesn't want us to be haughty. He wants us to be humble. Humility. He wants humility. He wants us to say, well, what did I do wrong? How can I fix it? We see this all over the place. We see it with the Pharisee and the publican in Luke chapter 18. We see it in the same book in Luke chapter 15 with the prodigal son, where the elder son's like, well, I've been here the whole time, and you're just throwing a party for this other kid. There's a lack of humility. A lack of humility causes problems, and this is the problem we're dealing with the Pharisees in Jesus' time. Is a lack of humility. It's arrogance. It's haughty. It's all this like, well, look at me. Look where I'm at. Look what I did. I'm not wrong. I'm following God's law. You're wrong. You're not. And it's all this finger pointing. And Jesus is coming in and he's saying, let's not do that. Let's live the heart of God's law, not just what we see on the pages. What is the heart of God's law? It's because it's deeper than most of us think, and deeper than most of us can comprehend and feel. Humility is the answer to this problem. This is why this bottom line is so important this morning. This is why we have to remember anything about the Sermon on the, if we're going to remember anything about the Sermon on the Mount, anything about Matthew chapter 7, 1-6, we got to remember this one thing. This is so, so vitally important. So here it is. Humility paves the way for compassion. Humility paves the way for compassion. If I want to build relationships with people, humans aren't perfect, right? We don't have everything right. We don't have everything nailed down. But if we're following Jesus, this should be our motto. Our motto should be to live in humility, because humility paves the way from Christ. Was Jesus haughty? Was Jesus arrogant? Was he egotistical? No, not the Jesus I read of. The Jesus I read of was compassionate and humble and kind and generous. And he was the individual who's like, look, if you want to live God's way, you have to live my way. Humility paves the way for compassion. And the problem that we're dealing with the Pharisees is that they have no compassion and they have no humility. What they have is judgment and comparison. And they're saying, look what I do right and look what you do wrong. I am following the law to the letter of the T. You're not. Look at me. This is the way you're supposed to live righteously. This is the way you're supposed to live in God's kingdom. Jesus says, no. That's not how this works. That's not the point of this. As the very problem that we're dealing with is that you have no humility. And so your problems are stemming from your arrogance and your ego and saying, well, it's more important that I get what I want than to live God's way. And so we come into Matthew, the beginning of Matthew chapter 7. Now you're probably wondering, well, why do we talk about anxiety at the end of Matthew chapter 6? Well, it's important because in that religious period, is there's a lot of worry. It was like, well, am I doing things right? Am I doing it the right way? And all you see is these religious teachers, and all you see is these people who are living a life of, well, I'm this individual who's got it all right, and if you want to be right with God, you got to follow my way. And that's kind of the picture, the image of that's being painted for the people. And so there's words like, well, am I right with God because I'm not doing it this way? I'm doing it differently, and I have other obligations, and I'm not living the way that they want me to live, and I can't do this. And Jesus says, don't worry about that. Your Father in heaven will take care of that need. Trust him. And then it's like he turns his head and he looks directly at the Pharisees, directly at the people who are following the Pharisees. And he wants them to know something. He says, do not judge so that you will not be judged. Condemn is really the notion of the word here. Condemn is the idea here. You're condemning people, not judging people. Not all judgment is wrong, okay? You're not always saying, you gotta be careful who you let influence your life. You gotta judge intentions, integrity. You gotta look at people and say, well, do I really want to do that? You gotta judge your own actions. You gotta see where you gotta do that kind of judgment. This kind of judgment, it's not our job to condemn. Jesus is saying, don't judge, do not judge so that you will not be judged in light of the day of judgment of God. This is what he's saying. For in this way that you judge, you will be judged by your standard of measure. It will be measured to you. So in other words, if you judge people a certain way, guess what? You're not only going to get that from God, you're going to get that from other people too. If you judge somebody a certain way and then all of a sudden, you do something wrong, how do you think you're going to be judged by that same person you judge so harshly? Don't judge harshly. Don't condemn harshly. This is what he's saying. He's like, don't judge so that you won't be judged, but then you got to think about it long term. How do you want to be judged by God? Do you want to be condemned by God? And you really got to think about that. Because in the following verses, he's going to talk to us about being careful who we allow to lead our lives, because who we allow to lead our lives will determine where we spend eternity. And so to take caution in this idea of like, well, do you really want to be judged in this way? Your measurement of how you judge. I mean, think about it. If we didn't have a standard measurement for certain things, everything would be different measurements. This probably whole room would be off balance because, you'd have some contractor at different, his measurement for an inch was 1.5 inches, and the other guy was, 1/2 inch. And the idea of measuring, like, do you get what I'm saying here? To measure, like, we have to have a standard of measure, and our standard of measure is not God's standard of measure. God's standard of measure is completely different. God doesn't judge based on what he sees. He looks at your heart. And that's the difference. You judge on appearances because we're human. That's all we can do. We can't read minds. We can't read thoughts. I can't see what everybody's thinking right now. But God can. God knows. And so he judges by the heart, not what he sees on the outside, not the external. Then here he goes. He goes, here's a good illustration. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and do not notice the log, okay? The log that is in your own eye. How in the world do you get away with that? You can look and say, hey man, you got something on your glasses there. Well, yeah, you're wearing a pair of, sleep goggles or whatever. How do you see that? How do you know? How do you know that the speck is in your brother's eye if you've got something obscuring your view? Is essentially what Jesus is saying. Why do you go to pull the speck out of your brother's eye, which you can't even see clearly? And then have something completely obscuring your face so that you can see clearly, because you haven't helped yourself. And you're trying to help others. Look at this. Or how can you say to your brother? Notice he goes on sight first. He says, what you see, what you look at, what you see. And then he says, what you say, or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye? As if you were to say, look, I've got it all down. I'm going to walk up to you and tell you got a speck in your eye. Meanwhile, you've got a log in your own eye. Your nose is growing like Pinocchio. You're about, you know what I'm saying? So this is the idea. How can you do that? How can you say that? And behold, the log is in your own eye. This is a good illustration. Because what Jesus is trying to put in perspective is we need to help ourselves before we help others. And that humility is the way to compassion. So here he goes, the last section here. You hypocrite, right? Everybody knows what a hypocrite is, right? A pretender, a faker, an individual who plays pretend. An actor is another way you could describe this word. You actor, you pretender is what Jesus is saying. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will what? See clearly. Take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do we get what he's saying here? If I'm an individual who's just completely got my attention and my focus on other people and not on myself, what do I become if I'm not bettering myself as an individual, if I'm not trying to live more Christ-like and I'm just focused on other people and what other people are doing and what other people are saying and how other people are living? I don't want to live that way. I don't want to be that way. I need to focus on me. If I'm focused on everybody else, I'm not focused on the right things. And this is what Jesus is bringing to light. He's like, you've got to pay attention to how you're judging people. And then he ends with this. He says, do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not cast or throw your pearls before the swine or pigs, or they will trample them under feet and tear you to pieces. Okay? Now, there's a couple of points you want to make here. Is that essentially what he's saying is animals don't care about what you truly value, right? In other words, like you don't give to dogs what is set apart for something special, what is holy, what is valuable. And then he says, don't throw your pearls, what's valuable to you, before pigs, right? If you ever pig hunted, pigs are nasty. Or seen pig hunting, pigs are nasty creatures. Not in the sense that I guess they are, but pigs are nasty creatures. You get in their way. They can't see very well, but if they smell you, man, I've seen videos and videos and videos on YouTube. Wild pigs tearing people up, people with cuts in their arms. They don't care. They're trying to protect themselves. They don't care about what you value. And he's really referencing the group of people that is honing in on this dynamic. He's saying the Pharisees, he's like, they're dogs and swines. Don't give what is valuable to you, the most valuable parts of you, to those people, because they won't value them like God values them. Give the best parts of who you are to your Father who is in heaven. And it falls back on the first 18 verses of Matthew chapter 6. When he goes back to these ideas of praying and giving and fasting, and it's not for show, it's not for other people. We don't do good to be seen as good, but we do it in secret. So our Father who's in secret will reward us. That's the whole point. That's the whole thing. He's like, they don't care about you. They care about themselves and what you see from them, not you. In reality, this is where we land. Not all types of judgment are wrong, but I do like to look at it this way, because this helps us to understand what's going on in Jesus' day. Judgment is only wrong when it becomes comparison. Judgment is only wrong when it becomes comparison. What I mean by that is all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, right? Oh, nobody's perfect. Nobody's got it all down. Anybody in this room never sinned? Okay, let's be serious for a minute. Never sinned? It's not true. Judgment is only wrong when it becomes comparison, when it's me comparing myself to somebody else and saying, look what I've got. And in reality, comparison is the enemy of compassion. It's the enemy. When I start comparing myself to people, well, look what I do and look what you do. I live along this moral line, even though behind closed doors it's something completely different. And I start comparing myself to people, and it removes that my ability to have compassion for the people who need my compassion. I don't think Jesus was an incompassionate person, but he definitely didn't compare himself to anybody. He was not concerned with how he lined up with other people. He was teaching and preaching God's will. Comparison is the enemy of compassion. And you know what? If you don't believe Jesus, if you don't believe Jesus in the way, the humility paves the way for compassion. Just take a look. Let's take a look at for a minute at what Paul says in Galatians chapter 6. Turn your Bibles over there. This is really important because Paul lays out a dynamic here that we have to understand. He essentially repeats the ideas that Jesus presents in 7:1 through 6 on judging. He says this, brethren, if anyone is caught in any sin or trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of humility. If someone is caught in a sin, don't treat it like it's nothing, because guess what? You sin too. In a spirit of humility, you who are spiritual, you spiritual leaders, you people who are in line with God, go and restore someone. I mean, then look at this. Each looking to yourself. Not to them and going, well, I'm never going to do that. Look to yourself and go, what if I get caught in this? So that you too will not be tempted. Bear one another's burden and there fulfill the law of Christ. In other words, don't judge the people you're sitting in the same room with. He's saying, look, here's what you have to do. If someone's caught in a sin, in a trespass, how do you get them back? You restore them in a spirit of humility. You go to them with love and kindness and compassion and say, well, what can happen? I mean, then look at this. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But each one must examine his own work, and then he will have a reason for boasting in regard to himself alone, not in regard to one another. There's no comparison. There's no comparing. You can't compare. That's how we help people. And then look at this. For each will bear his own load. So I'll give you the takeaway because I can see some of you falling asleep, all right? Here it is. It's just this one thing. We as followers of Jesus, if we can do this one thing, if we can redirect the way we see things, if we can redirect our mindsets to this one thing, we're going to get somewhere. We need to judge internally before we condemn externally. We need to judge internally. We need to look at ourselves. We need to look at what we're doing and who we are and what's wrong with us and go, well, am I really right with God? Because if I'm not really right with God, how can I help someone else? How can I help someone if I haven't helped myself? If I haven't really dug deep and go, what have I done? What have I done wrong? If it's in relationships or whatever you want to call it. If it's just personally, I mean, maybe we just need to do this to begin with for ourselves, for our relationship with God, and go, have I been as diligent in my relationship with God as I should have been? Have I really judged internally? Have I really looked inside myself and gone, where can I get better? Where do I lack? What is in abundance in my life? What has God given me abundantly? What can I thank Him for? What can I be grateful for? What can I look to Him for? I mean, it requires us to do this one thing, just to look in the mirror. Just to look at my image, to look at myself, to go, what am I trying to do here? Who am I? What is my character? What am I trying to accomplish? I mean, this is hard. This is easier said than done, okay? It's easier said than done. It's easier to say look in the mirror than to actually really look in the mirror and examine yourself. This is a truly difficult task. This is a truly difficult thing to do as a human being. For me to look in the mirror and to be honest with myself, to be honest with my character, to be honest about my relationship with God. Right? This is what Jesus is saying. You got to look in the mirror. You should be more concerned with judging yourself. We should be more concerned with our own failures than we are about our brothers. We should be more concerned with where we're failing and what we're doing wrong than we are with the brothers. Because again, we'll go back to this question: how can we help others if we don't help ourselves? If we aren't truly looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying, what is it that I can correct? What is it that I can do wrong? What is it that I did wrong? Where can I go right? If it has to do with relationships, if it has to do with, maybe you've just been slacking in your relationship with God. Maybe it's just something, I just haven't been as diligent. I just haven't been as motivated in my relationship with God as I used to be. Maybe it's something different than that. There's something taking your time, something taking your mind, something taking you off. Maybe there's I don't know what you're dealing with and what's going on in your life per se. But everybody has to self-reflect at some point. Everybody has to look internally and stand before God and go, God, what do you want me to do? If I'm truly going to be an individual who influences the lives of people, I've got to help myself. How can we bring people into the church? How can we help people outside the church? How can we help people in our community if we haven't helped ourselves? How can we reach the lost? In reality, if we really haven't reached ourselves, if we really haven't looked internally and done the work and got ourselves in the right position, how can we bring other people into our community of faith? The simple answer is we can't. So this is important for us. We have to reflect. We have to understand that humility paves the way for compassion. If we understand that humility, that if we adopt an attitude of humility as individuals, as Jesus followers, as disciples, as Christians, we can make a lot more progress. I mean, what if everybody does this? What if everybody in our world just did these two things? Help themselves and had an attitude of humility. What would the world look like? What would the world we live in look like? I mean, you know what the world is like that you live in. It's pretty selfish. It's pretty self-serving. And then what if the church? What would the church look like? What would the church as a whole, the body as a whole across this country? Because we're not unaware that people are people and people have disagreements, and people have problems. What would the church look like? If we did those two things, helped ourselves and had an attitude of humility, I think the church would explode in growth. I think it would be an environment that people thrived on and said, I want to be a part of that. I want to go where they're going. I want to do what they do. I want to be a part of who they are. And I want to know who Jesus is. Because these people in adopting, I mean, maybe it's not those two things they see, maybe it's other things, but in those two things, people can see Jesus by us living that way. I mean, it's relatively simple. So I got something for you. There's one thing that you can do this week, because we all deal with this at times, right? We all, we face work situations, we face family situations, we face, sibling situations. You got siblings, you face all sorts of different things in your life. And every one of us is pretty quick to go just like this. So when you feel yourself get angry, overwhelmed, you feel tension, contentious, this is what I want you to do. I just want you to pause. Just pause. Catch yourself early on enough to go, okay, where did I go wrong? Because, yeah, you know what? It might not have been your fault. It might not have been you who started the problem. But that question alone right there, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? Who did I do wrong? Allows me to self-reflect and really respond to the problem rather than react to the problem, because that's our issue. We're reactionary people. We have this instant gratification monkey all over the place that's constantly trying to, cause us to act on our impulses instead of just sometimes pausing, being still, and responding to the situation and saying, what would God do in this situation? Just pause. Just stop for a second and go, what can I do? And then I'd encourage you as you deal with those situations to share them with the people in your life. Share them with your church family. Share them with the people around you. When you did this thing, how did the situation turn out as opposed to how it would have reacted if you would have just reacted? If I respond rather than react, what does it say about me? Who is that in the likeness of? If you're here today and you have a need, we here at the Pleasant View Church of Christ, we believe in the baptism for the forgiveness of sins. You may be on a journey in your life where you feel you need to take this next step. And we offer that opportunity for you. We leave the front pews open if you're comfortable coming forward and letting us know. Or if that's not comfortable for you, maybe it is that you just need to tell somebody that you're ready to make that next step. Whatever it is, if you need to confess a sin, there's an opportunity right now for you to do that, for you to make that right with God and with your brothers and sisters. If you come forward as we stand and sing.